Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edie Turner, and on behalf of the Office of Development and Alumni Relations and all of my colleagues, I want to welcome back to campus our very treasured alumni, their guests, our students and faculty, and we really are thrilled that you're here with us today to celebrate the Changing Times, Changing Lives panel discussion. And today really is a celebration. We are celebrating the establishment of the Dorothy Day Lecture Series Endowment. I came across a quote from Dorothy Day, which I think embodies the class of 1971, and most especially the kind of founding members of the Lecture Series Committee, Leslie Blank, Kathy Carr, Marie Cromwell, and Rosemary Maher. And if you'll permit me to read the quote. The greatest challenge of the day is how to bring about a revolution of the heart, a revolution which has started within each one of us. So again, congratulations on your successful fundraising efforts, and we really look forward to the lecture series in the fall. So I would like to welcome Sister Janet Eisner, the president of Emmanuel. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Edie. And I am just delighted to welcome you today, and especially the class of 1971, and particularly recognize what an accomplishment, what an achievement, and what great initiative. And we are so appreciative of it. So congratulations. Congratulations on this turnout as well. So that's my first word. Congratulations and thank you. You chose to fund an annual lecture on a topic that reflects the interaction of sociology, history, economics, political action, and connections between the late 60s and early 70s and the present. How timely that you come to Boston this spring weekend, a time when we still feel the impact of the events of the last few weeks. To your questions, yes, our students were present at the marathon, as they always are, as volunteers, participants, and each one came back to campus safely. Thank God. Several of our students witnessed the events near the finish line. Others have close friends who were hurt or present. At Emmanuel, we did what we always do. We came together as a college community for liturgy, for prayer service, for counseling, for discussion of the events, both inside and outside of classroom. And we kept each other informed through social media, tweets, emails to parents. We embraced our students. Today, after the clamless clam bake, which is also a tradition, but not the clamless part, students are deeply engaged right now in semester end examinations, preparation for papers that they are presenting. We just had a major presentation of the senior initiatives for distinction on last Thursday, and that also showed the work of the students despite what was going on around us. But personally, I am so glad to see you, to welcome you back to this campus of your youth. And I think it was about 45 years ago that I met some of you for the first time when you came to Emmanuel as prospective students. I do remember you well, and the influence that those times had on you and how you shaped those times and the history of this college. Back then, you heard often and well from Sister Ann Cyril as she urged you to prepare your browse papers and opened the world wider and wider to you, your browse papers at the MFA and at the Gardner, and from Sister Maria Augusta on how to analyze and reflect often on the needs of those times and to take an active role in public life. You heard there about Dorothy Day, and you too reached out in response to others as she did. Today, our Emmanuel students hear about Dorothy Day in their classes, specifically in their class on Catholic social teachings. 96% of Emmanuel College students participate in significant outreach programs throughout their years at Emmanuel. This year, August, Emmanuel acquired a new property in Roxbury, which we've named the Notre Dame campus, which includes the William Lloyd Garrison House. This site will be used as an urban retreat for our students and for neighbors, and as a living, learning community for Emmanuel students with a focus on social justice. But today is all about you, your reflections, your lives, and we are eager to hear from you. Again, my deepest gratitude and congratulations on planning this event, on being in touch with each other so often in preparation for this event. So thank you for being with us and for your great initiative. I appreciate
Sister Janet, Dean Leonard, our guardian angel, my distinguished panelists, fellow alumni, students, family, and friends. The development of the Dorothy Day Lecture Series, endowed by the class of 1971, is a story about friendship, resilience, gratitude, and commitment. The story begins with the deaths of two 1971 classmates, both colorful and lovable characters. As a group of friends from the class of '71, we struggled with finding the right way to celebrate the years we had shared with them and to honor the wonderful women and the wonderful lives they had led. The traditional alumni choices of a tree, a bench, a plaque on a classroom wall, or scholarship money just did not fit. We had attended Emmanuel College at a time of dramatic social, political, cultural, and religious changes. Civil rights, women's rights, and Vietnam War protests had rigorously engaged us through teach-ins, protests, marches to Boston Common, and sit-ins. Our lives were forever changed by the years we were here. Our country was significantly altered by the years we were here. A war ended, and the college we claimed in September 1967 was very different from the one we left in May 1971. For students here today, your college experience has been transformed by the events of April 15th. You will forever resonate to that experience. So after months of email deliberations and discussions, we decided that we would develop an annual alumni lecture. The lecture would be a living legacy, celebrating liberal arts as a way of thinking and as a basis for meaningful action. We will be forever indebted to Sister Mary Johnson, formerly of the Sociology Department, and Kay Moriarty O'Dwyer of the Alumni Office for their wise and invaluable consultation and guidance in the development of the lecture proposal. Emmanuel already had 2 endowed lectures, but we were breaking new ground with the proposal of an alumni-focused and funded lecture series. We decided to name the lecture series after Dorothy Day, a courageous and articulate laywoman who never wavered in her efforts to champion economic and social justice. Dorothy Day had in fact lectured at Emmanuel College. The choice of Dorothy Day is also consistent with the Sisters of Notre Dame's long history of commitment to social justice. We presented our proposal to the college, and after some discussion, they gave it their blessing with the caveat that we would need to raise $100,000 to ensure an endowed status and to provide ongoing financial stability. The college did provide guardian angels, in the person of Kay Moriarty O'Dwyer and Edie Turner. And Edie, where are you? We can never thank you enough. We couldn't be here today without you. The work of fundraising has been so much more than we ever imagined. Donations range from $10 to $10,000. And from a class of about 300, we were able to meet that mark. We met this goal because of 3 amazing classmates who led the grassroots effort. They have been absolutely dogged in their efforts, creative, patient, and resilient. I would like to ask Leslie Perry Blank, Kathy Carr, they're giving me daggers, I'm just going to ignore them, Marie Mancuso Cromwell to stand and accept a well-deserved round of applause for this remarkable achievement. Stand up. That's why I wouldn't let you read my remarks. In the process of fundraising, Leslie, Kathy, and Marie heard admirable stories of resilience and lives well led from their sister alumni. Knowing that we would not be able to have the first lecture until April 2014, they came up with a plan for today's panel as a prequel to the first lecture. After today, we will move on to the planning for the first lecture, scheduled for April 2014. We would welcome any and all suggestions for possible speakers. When you came in, there was this handout, and I would encourage you, if you have any ideas, the sky's the limit, but we did have to take Hillary off the list because we heard her fee is $200,000, so that would... But we're willing to entertain anybody, any ideas you have. There's also email addresses. So we want to get some really wonderful speakers here. We started this journey in 2010, and we are very grateful for everyone who has been a part of this. It has truly become a class project, and we can all be proud of this gift. The class of '71 created for Emmanuel. As we move forward, we will continue to need to fund the lecture series. We hope that it will go on to become a rich and rewarding annual alumni experience. I want to thank Dean Leonard for agreeing to moderating today's panel. Dean Leonard is the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and as a historian has a special interest in the 60s and 70s. I also want to thank my fellow alumni for so generously agreeing to participate as panelists to share their stories of their lives and how they were impacted by Emmanuel. And I'd like to end with a quote from Yeats. "Count where a man's glory most begins and ends. My glory was, I had such friends." Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here with you today as you launch the Dorothy Day lecture series, and I look forward to the lecture next April. I'm also honored to really moderate this panel of impressive alumnae from the classes of the early 1970s. We've been talking upstairs for a little bit before, and I spoke to some folks a little bit on the phone earlier this week, and I truly am impressed with their accomplishments and their experiences that they're going to share here with you today. They came to Emmanuel amidst dramatic social, cultural, and political changes affecting not only the United States, but really the whole world throughout the throughout the 60s and the 70s. From the civil rights movement to the rise of the youth culture, to student rights, to the war on poverty, and a movement to end the war in Vietnam. These changes swept through the country, and they still affect us here today. Another really important movement of the period, as we all know, is the women's movement. I often describe the study of history to my students as the study of continuity and change over time, because it's really impossible to understand sort of one period of history or one movement or one event without putting it into some context. And I know today we'll have a lot of context for what we'll hear from these women. The women's movement in the United States has a long history. You can go back to the 19th century and the struggle for the right to vote and for economic rights. Historians of that period often refer to it as the cult of true womanhood. And as we think about that, you can often sometimes contextualize the 60s with the 50s. But the times, as they say, were changing. And if you just think back on some of the key milestones for the women's movement, you have the 1963 publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which we're celebrating its 50th year right now. A year later, the Civil Rights Act came in and forbade discrimination based on race and sex. In 1965, the Supreme Court struck down bans on the use of contraception. And the National Organization of Women was founded just a year later. By the end of the decade, advertisements for jobs were outlawed which specified gender. You can read some newspapers from the 60s and just see exactly they would describe what they wanted in a candidate. Congress overwhelmingly passed the Equal Rights Amendment in 1972. And it's amazing to think both at the Democratic and National Conventions that year, they endorsed the Equal Rights Amendment. Times have changed a little bit, but. And it was also at the Democratic National Convention that women rallied around Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman elected to Congress, and then her name put in nomination for president. So by the early 70s, it seemed anything was really possible. Today, we're going to hear from these alumni about their experiences and how the changing times at Emmanuel, their lives at Emmanuel were affected by the changing times in this crucial point in American history. I'm going to ask each panelist just to introduce themselves just briefly and say a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to get into some questions. We'll make sure at the end there's plenty of time for questions for you in the audience to ask of the panelists.
Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Diane Tillotson, class of 1970. I'm a partner at Emmanuel and Barnes. I've been practicing law for about 33 years. I'm also actively engaged in several projects in Nicaragua where I go almost every year and have for the past 10 or 12 years. I'm on the A. Jean Bruger Education Foundation Board, which is a board that provides educational scholarships to young women and young men in Nicaragua. I also have done a San Juan del Sur Newton Sister City project with actually other alumna from Emmanuel who got me involved in that. And we do water projects, providing water to local barrios and so forth. So I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon, and that's all I'll say at the moment.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to see so many of my old friends, and you all look terrific. My name is Louise Schiavone. I'm a member of the class of 72. I was previously a member of the Board of Trustees here. Thank you, Sister Janet. That was really a thrill for me. I've been a journalist most of my life. I got my master's from the J School at Columbia University, and I've worked at the Associated Press, CNN, ABC News. I do a lot of writing and some talk show hosting. You probably hear me on NPR occasionally. And, and my full-time gig right now is I'm teaching leadership ethics and business communications at the Graduate Business School at Johns Hopkins University. And there I have an opportunity to talk to students and tell them it really does matter how you express yourself. And for instance, it's probably a good idea not to speak to the nation while interrupting your speech with a Marco Rubio sized bottle of water. But it's a fabulous opportunity for me because I get to see, all the new generations and what they're thinking and what they're involved in. And we'll talk later. But it's really been fabulous, and Emmanuel gave me a fabulous foundation.
Thank you. The Sister Janet, Dean Leonard, fellow panelists, and fellow colleagues. My name's Mary McCauley Manzi, and I I retired from the probate and family court bench in 2011, almost 2 years now. I had served 25 years at that point, and it was time, in my view, that I should do other things. I loved the work. As Sheila McGovern said, who didn't go to Emmanuel, but she went to BC Law. For some of us, the work of the probate and family court is a vocation, and the seeds were planted with that vocation for me with Notre Dame nuns at Cushing in South Boston. And here it continued at Emmanuel. One of the questions they sent around was, how did Emmanuel change your life? I think that to have a life of public service and have the opportunities to do what I was able to do in that work. And now I'm working as a lawyer with my husband and a couple other people that are great people. And I'm waiting for my son Matt, who's the first baby born to a probate judge in the history of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I feel that I've been very, I've always known what mattered, and I've always had the values that were taught to me by the nuns, and that's the truth. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion.
My name is Mary Lee Frisbee, and I work for J.P. Morgan Chase. Luckily, I get to sit in Shelton, Connecticut. I don't have to commute to New York. Vice president and a compliance manager, and it's my job in the commercial banking line of business to translate statutes and regulations so that we do everything. I don't know how I follow that because I've spent most of my life doing what the government told me not to do. So I'll start there. I'm Susan Coco, class of '74. I have the distinct honor also of being the daughter of an Emmanuel graduate, Dorothy Coco, 1949, and the mother of an Emmanuel graduate, Francesca Capitalupo, the class of 2010. It's quite a legacy here. I actually have two professions, one for which I'm paid and one for which I'm not. The one I am paid for is I am a business and marketing consultant, principally in the area of advertising strategy and communications. And I work for Omnicom, which is the largest of the global advertising and communication networks globally. My non-paid profession, which I do with about the same number of hours per week, almost, is in politics, where I have been actively engaged in the political world, at least since Emmanuel. We can talk about that later. But also throughout the last 2 decades, I focus a lot of my efforts in partisan politics, in getting women to run for office, which is vital. Women make a difference when they serve. They change the dialogue when they serve. It was my great honor to run Hillary's campaign in the state of Connecticut. That was a game changer and quite inspirational, and I'm interested in speaking with any of you who would like to run for office.
Great, thank you.
I'm Mary Morris Anderson, also class of '71. Like my good friend Mary, we were in a lot of English classes together. The series is on changing times, and I think the biggest change for me is being on this side of the podium. I was a rather lackluster student, for lack of a better description. I majored in English because Paula Henderson was, and gee, I really liked Paula, and you know, that'll be fun, we'll go to those classes. So my experience is a little different, but I'm happy to be here with this crowd, and I think what I got out of Emmanuel was just lack of, you know, I didn't go to classes, didn't read a lot of the books, but I still absorbed a ton, and from the ashes developed a really good career by learning how to communicate and make things happen.
Great. Well, I see how this could go today. It'll be fun. I guess I would just start off with, why did you choose to come to Emmanuel, and what were some of the salient points you took away about the college and how it affected you? Anyone can start?
All right, I'll start. I
wanted to be a chemistry major. I loved science. I loved English and all. I went to Cushing for girls. I never had sat in a class with boys until I went to law school. Not that I sought that kind of companionship. I'm serious, I didn't. But in any event, I wanted to be a chemistry major. I had a wonderful Sister Alice Francis was my teacher at Cushing. And somebody took me out to Boston College, and some family took me there. And I remember it like yesterday. I was in what you could drive a car, but no one did. And I was with this other family, and there was a tour guide, and we were walking along, and I said, "What's that building?" He said, "Oh, that's arts and sciences." He said, "But we can't go in there because you're a girl and you can't be a chemistry major." And he said, down the, I remember it like yesterday. I probably don't remember yesterday, but I remember like yesterday I was incensed. Smoke coming out of my ears. This is before you heard the word feminist. I didn't need that. I had a mother and father who raised me and my 3 brothers the same way. Anyway, he said, "You can go down to that school of nursing." And I said, "No, thank you. I'm not going to be a nurse." "You can go to the school of education." I said, "No, thank you. I'm not going to be it wasn't what I thought I wanted. So I felt that Emmanuel, and it's a continuing story. When you go to Emmanuel in those days, 1967, it wasn't that the boy was the president and the girl was the treasurer, secretary of any class. Here at Emmanuel, there wasn't even any issue about any of this. It was just like in my home. I never heard you can't do this. I never heard you can't be. My sister-in-law, Dr. Rita Manzi Feliso, graduated 15 years before me. She's an anesthesiologist. Judge Mary Beatty Muse, and I'm probably saying Beatty wrong, and I'll be corrected, sister, please. She graduated from here in 1941, and she was appointed a mother of 11 children. She was I was, and when I joined, there were only 4 women. And, so I say that Emmanuel, I thank God, I thank BC for 2 things. Cross doesn't even make my map. I thank Boston College for their narrowness in 1967. And then in 1974, I applied to Boston College Law School. Somehow I had it in my mind that I wanted to go there. Don't ask. And I got waitlisted. And I was, again, not very happy. My grades weren't that great, Mary. I look back at my grades and I say to myself, gee, that's probably why you got waitlisted, Mary. I had good boards, but who knew? So I went and I did not get in there. And I went to Suffolk Law School, where I met a guy from Villanova, from Methuen and Lawrence. And I thanked when I got an award a while back, and all the judges from the whole state. A lot of people did think BC is superior. So I said, I want to thank the Boston College Law School admissions director for not letting me in, because Vinnie Manzi wasn't at BC.
Great, thank you.
So I'm glad I got chosen here.
Anyone else? We talked about sort of Emmanuel in there. I guess what I would...
Okay, I'll answer that question. So, I had Sister Janet as a high school English teacher at St. Mary's High School in Lawrence. And, and Sister Janet left St. Mary's to be Dean of Admissions at that time here at Emmanuel College. And I came from an Italian-American family where the boys had greater powers than the girl. I have 3 brothers, and I was allowed a very narrow band of schools that I could potentially be trusted at. As Sister Janet learned, I couldn't even be trusted here, but but anyway, so we had our appointment for our interview that day with Sister Janet, and it was the day of one of these massive blizzards. Like they were 5 feet. It was like back when it used to snow, and so we came here, and everything was closed except Emmanuel, and walking onto the campus was so welcoming and lovely. It was like the castle in Disney's Beauty and the Beast, right? I mean, it was just gorgeous, and of course we know that Sister Janet has gone on to be really a defining leader of this school and preserve this school and set a course for a very strong future for this school. And it was a wonderful opportunity, stroke of luck, that I met her in high school and that I was able to know her here at Emmanuel College. I had another teacher from St. Mary's High School who went on to be Dean of Students, and during the Troubles.
We're going to talk about those next.
Wait just a second. So she said to me, you know what, you're not Sister Janet, this other sister, who I hold in high regard, said, you know what your problem is? You're fresh. And I was thinking, isn't that a good thing? And so, but that's how I came to Emmanuel College.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
One of the things I find amazing is that at least 3 of us on the panel, and maybe others, started out at a Sisters of Notre Dame high school. I went to Bishop Stang High School in Dartmouth, and one of my teachers was Sister Magdalene Julie, who then migrated to Emmanuel College, but she was very influential in inspiring me, although I will say that like my fellow panelists, the list of colleges that were available to me was very short. It was Emmanuel, Salve Regina, or Regis. Those were the 3 I was allowed to apply to. And I thought, well, Emmanuel's close to Fenway Park. It's in Boston. You know, it's got to be my choice. But the other thing that I find amazing, just listening to the introductions, is, at least for me, I didn't find anything particularly historic or unusual about the circumstances and the times that all of us were in at the time. I remember being amazed when my daughter, who's now 29, came home and said, I'm taking a course in the 60s and 70s. And I said, the 1960s? And it was amazing to me to think of it as a historic period, because I think that when I got to Emmanuel, one of the things that was, and it was very different because Bishop Stang was a co-ed class, and we did have a presumption that the president of the class would be male, the treasurer would be male. We were allowed to take notes and assist as vice president. Very different set of expectations at Emmanuel, which was incredibly refreshing. But when we got here, the assumption from the people that taught us, and I think all of us, was that we would be in charge. And I think that was the incredible difference that Emmanuel made, certainly in my life.
Great, thank you. Why don't we just change that a little bit, talk a little about what was it like to be a student here at Emmanuel, and how did the changing times affect you?
I really wanted to take this one because I just went to a concert. I live on Cape Cod, and there's a wonderful symphony down there, the Cape Cod Symphony, and they do pops concerts. They're fabulous. So I go with 4 friends. One of them's an Emma, Susan Harrington, and we bring 3 moms. So we have the 3 that are in their 80s. And a couple of weeks ago, the concert was music of the 60s. So I'm in my glory. I'm thinking army jacket. I'm thinking headband. So, but I don't. I figure, all right, you're 63, grow up. So we're at dinner afterwards, and my mother proceeds to describe to the other moms what it was like. She said, I took my daughter to Emmanuel she probably didn't remember the year, but she said, I took her there. We had bought some lovely Pandora sweaters and skirts, and she looked so nice, and we were pretty sure that, the nuns kind of kept them in at night, and all was well. And she said, and then 3 years later, she came home. She had dungarees on, an army jacket, a headband, no bra, horrible music, and what was that all about? It was wild. Those transitions from that first year with the mantilla and the gloves to then, I think the junior year with Kent State. What was that? May 4, May 5? And things just erupted. So, yeah, that was it.
I just want to make a quick comment about being a student during the 70s. It sounds prosaic to state that that was a period of transformative change. But as Dr. Leonard has said, we came to school at a time that was infused by justice and the concept of justice and the concept of empowerment. The personal was political, and that Letty Pogrom coined that phrase. For our generation, for my generation, being on this campus, being in college in general, during that period of time meant you were thrust into the center of civil rights, the anti-war movement, the women's movement, the Equal Pay Act, Title IX. Many of our students that go to school here now was the first time it became law that institutions that received federal funding could not discriminate on gender. Think of all the wonderful women's sports that are now being funded and mandated, frankly, because of Title IX. Think of the effect on high school athletes, high school students, both men as well as women. What was always clear, our faculty was involved in the social issues of the day. Our student body was involved in the social issues of the day, sometimes on campus, sometimes off campus. You couldn't turn around any place in your life and not know that you were supposed to become engaged in one way or another. And when you go down the list of what happened in the 70s, and what was started in the 70s and what happened, Massachusetts passed the Equal Rights Amendment in 1976. You know, it never was ratified. You realize that, right? Well, Massachusetts was one of the states that passed the Equal Rights Amendment. Connecticut, my current home state, passed it as well, by the way. I'm proud of that. To be engaged and be part of the process became essential. And we were inspired here, one of my favorites, inspired to make the most of it and go out and be part of the world. And that's what I think was essential in the 70s. I am not sure being part of the world is the zeitgeist today. I think being global is part of the world today. I think being connected, we were less connected. Media was different, it was monolithic a little bit more in the 70s. I think there's a different mindset in this generation. I think it's positive. I don't think it's negative, but I think that we were in the crucible and we lived it and we came through it and we contributed to it.
What were some of the issues that resonated with you on campus? I know some of you were talking about being part of the SDS and that sort of thing.
Before I pass the microphone to someone who's actual member, okay. That was the comment that I was going to make, is that I have a couple of pictures in my mind from my beginnings at Emmanuel, and one of them was reading the rule book of the college to my mother while she sewed labels into my clothes before I came, and how, you know, you had to wear skirts to class, and if you wanted to leave campus in pants, you had to get permission to do that. So that was one of my images, and then I fast forward to sometime, I think that freshman year, Nancy Ellen Brennan, I think, was a member of the class of 71, and there was this thing that was passed, was called the Constitution of Student Rights and Responsibilities. And one of the things that did or said was that if something affected only the students could decide. So we had this humongous meeting, Nancy Ellen with her clipboard and her notes, and Monday, when we were going to go to class, we were, you know, those that were involved were going to wear pants. So, you know, dungarees or slacks or whatever. And that was, you know, and my thought about that is that, you know, granted, it's engagement with the world, but it was engagement and making decisions in our own community right here. And the fact that not only did Emmanuel change us, we have changed Emmanuel.
I think things were happening so quickly, and I was a commuting student and working about 25 hours a week at an insurance company, Zurich American Insurance Company in Boston. So my time here was in blocks, you know, and And I just remember when you said to be engaged, I think that the old Emmanuel was, this may have been a transitional place until you were engaged to lead on into the sacrament of matrimony. And there was still some of that when I came in '67. And, but I think that what was so, so much was happening, and we took, each of us took our taste of all of it, I think. But what we understood from the comfort zone of Emmanuel was that each of us was regarded as an individual with special abilities who could give to the world, and we were really, I felt, charged with figuring that out with the aid of our friends and academics and English and philosophy, et cetera, but we expected to change the world, and it was, for all there may have been some tension between, I don't regard SDS as being welcomed on the campus, but there was an attitude that you are responsible, and it was that freedom and responsibility and the trust and the belief how we were, and none of it had to do with men at all. I never heard a word about, your brother this or your cousin Joe or any of that stuff. There was always just irrelevant. And what a gift.
Yeah. So I was president of student government during that period of time, and I think, when I look back at the issues that motivated us, I don't think on the campus per se that they were really super duper terrific issues as I look back on it. And so, for instance, getting rid of the theology requirement, those sorts of things. But I think what we sought more than anything else was an awareness among the people who were teaching us, and lots of our professors got it, and some of our professors did not. And I think that that's what motivated a lot of us, the sense that women have an equal role to play in the world, whether it's, how we shape our own studies to how we interact with the world, for instance, in terms of the war in Vietnam. The civil rights movement was very big, and that was very, very important to us. And it was interesting, that room that we had our little meeting in before we came down here was the site of that. Was anybody here in that 333, Pat, meeting where there were 3 faculty, 3 administration, 3 students? You and I were 2 of the 3. Who was the 3rd? Do you remember? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, but what did that do for us? And the Board of Trustees, right? The Board of Trustees was there. They were horrified by us. But anyway, but we all walked in with bird of paradise flowers, we were just, so, but what did this tell us? This told us, in spite of the fact that we seemed on adversarial grounds with the school, the truth is that we learned that we could engage, we could challenge, we could still be taken seriously, and this was wonderful preparation for the life that all of us in our generation have had, where just every step of the way we have had to challenge and engage, and you have to have an underlying faith that you will still be welcomed and embraced as part of the social apparatus. And that was Emmanuel's great contribution to those of us who were engaged in that way.
I think also that the perspective that I had is that there were 2 things, sort of 2 huge upheavals going on at almost exactly the same time. One of them perhaps not as significant globally, and that was the change that was going on a lot of college campuses, including Emmanuel, I can remember Sister Ann Cyril's first trip to Filene's basement and her description of that experience and how delighted we all were. And the nuns were in the process of beginning for the first time to dress in things other than habits. I can remember going to school as a freshman, and because we were supposed to be wearing skirts, we all wore our nightgowns under our raincoats until we were able to be permitted to wear pants. But at the same time, I remember as if it was yesterday, Kent State and the shock that just permeated the campus. And it was similar to the shock, frankly, of a week ago Monday, when we learned that 4 students had been shot on a college campus, and feeling that we all needed to be part of the reaction to that. And I also can remember, obviously we were not a co-ed campus at the time, but a lot of us were dating men then. And I can remember the very first draft lottery, which I believe was in 1969, and just being frozen with fear because so many of our close friends were being called into that draft.
You mentioned some of the faculty and people here who sort of thought it, and we could talk a little bit about some of the faculty who really inspired you and encouraged you all to sort of to think differently and to choose the paths that you did.
Previously told story. Well, I started as a chemistry major. Fairly early on, I realized that I didn't want to be in a lab. I certainly didn't want to be a doctor. I knew I was really not in the right place. As much as I loved physics, physical science, math. I loved math. I always get so annoyed with all that math anxiety that I think it was perpetrated by some evil people somewhere. But anyway. So there I am in chemistry, not doing very well either, not very happy, and I ended up going into the social department and loved it. Behavioral sciences minor, I was very happy. So it gets to be junior year, and I'm hanging around with Jackie Nolan and a few others that talked about going to law school all the time. And I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I was considering becoming a social worker. But at home, I didn't receive any, my parents had the idea that I would figure out whatever I needed to, and I would do a good job on it. It was none of this helicopter parents or any of that. You know, Mary, you'll be fine. Oh, okay. So what did I do? I walked by the stairs today. I had the wisdom. I never, despite being a social major, I never sat in a class with Sister Maria Augusta-Neal. But I heard her name spoken with reverence, repeatedly. I certainly accepted the reverence with which she was spoken of. And the grace, it really was the grace of God, I believe, who told me somehow, no kid told me to do this, go see Sister Maria Augusta-Neal and ask her what you should do. So I made an appointment, and I went to see her, and I remember it. I don't remember her words to me, but I went up those stairs at the side now in this building if you cut over to the library. So I just saw them, and they look smaller today. And I know they're the same stairs. I don't care what you did to the building, they're the same stairs. So I remember so distinctly going up there, and I was apprehensive, and I was junior. I had no money. I had a lot of loans. I had very little, and I thought my grades were okay. And anyway, I went in, and I sat there, and she didn't know me. I had never met her. Unbelievable, really. And she gave me about 10 questions. And I answered her thoroughly and to the best of my ability. And she said to me, Mary, I can get you a scholarship to Case, because we went into finances, I'm sure. She said, Mary, I can get you a scholarship to go to Case Western. Now, for me to leave South Boston, to go to the middle of the country, I would have done it, but it wouldn't have been too well received at home, I don't think. Anyway, she said, I can get you a scholarship, which was so wonderful for her to tell me. But she said, you should go to law school. So I thanked her, and I remember dancing down the stairs, like the whole experience of worrying about what should I do, because honestly, I didn't want to change the world one person at a time. I never knew I was going to be a judge, believe me, but I wanted to have the power to be able to make more extensive change than one-on-one. You know, I had some sense of that probably from social stuff. Who knows? You know, I am who I am. But imagine that. She like, you know, I never looked back. I was like, all right, that's what I'm doing.
All right, great, thank you. Anyone else?
That was very interesting to watch, principally these women not change their identity, but change their outward persona. That's what came first. How were you perceived by others? How did you represent yourself to others? It's a very interesting college, I think when I was here, the college was about 20, our faculty was about 20% religious. Much smaller than that, okay. It was about 20%. The psychology department had a lot. Psychology and English department had a lot of religious faculty. But what was fascinating is we were all changing we were looking at ourselves and reclaiming perception of oneself as a woman, as a participant in the world. In business, when I left this school, we did not have a presumption of job opportunity. We used to celebrate when women got an interview. Can you imagine? Celebrating when you got an interview as opposed to celebrating when you got the job? That was the first step, get the interview for something other than a secretarial position. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, get the interview, for God's sakes. Fascinating is our religious faculty were going through transformational times for themselves as well. The women who moved off campus, the women who lived in apartments, never lived on campus. You know, that was a different role. And they were very inspiring because they were also transparent about that dialogue. You mentioned, you know, talking about Sister Ann Cyril Delaney saying she went shopping at Filene's basement. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this? And it was okay. The faculty made a safe haven for you to explore as well the different attributes of yourself, to explore with intellectual curiosity, great intellectual curiosity, personal embrace of change. One of my personal favorites of the era was and with the freshman, I forget the name of the class. West and Civ, how could I forget that? West and Civ, they all say. But the number one phrase I'll never forget is to embrace the you-iness of you, those who had the class with her. So that meant anything you had, what you had within you was worthy of being explored, was worthy of being nurtured and brought forward. So our faculty were also in the midst of transformation, and we were here together. Was there separation between students and faculty? Well, of course. You know, faculty, I'm sure it's maybe a little less than that today. But it was also a great role modeling for us to see the faculty embrace change and struggle with their own changes as well.
The written and the verbal and analyze and what do we do, dyads and triads and all kinds of different ways she'd get us to engage, but that critical thinking and analytical ability has stood the test of time.
That brings, I would like to sort of switch gears a little bit, talk about your career paths and how you've gotten to where you are today, and just to share some of your experiences with that.
I can remember, I think it was the summer between junior year and senior year, we got a letter that said, if you want to get a job when you graduate, learn to type this summer. So I distinctly remember that. And And I guess I'd already taken typing in high school, so I didn't really pay attention to that. But when I came out, when I came out of college, I had no clue what I was going to do, and I went down to the unemployment office, and I got a job as a teller. And then the first time a management training opportunity opened up at the bank, I think there were like 88 people, this was a relatively small bank at the time. 88 people were looking to get into management training, and they were going to accept 8 people. And I thought, well, okay, fine. You think to yourself, and I think this is sort of like the teaching of, how do you learn at Emmanuel, how you make those assessments and analyze the problem. And I thought to myself, I need to do something that distinguishes me from everybody else. And I actually went back to school for an associate's degree because it was the only time in this particular discipline as a paralegal. It was just starting at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut, and they offered a 2-year program. And when they saw that they had somebody who already had a BA interested, and they were like, it was like the greatest thing since sliced bread from their perspective. So I did participate in that program, and that program was responsible for getting me my next 3 jobs.
I came to Emmanuel and I wanted to be a lawyer. I was a really good student in high school, came here on a scholarship, but then I've already described my experiences here were a little more varied. So my goal when I left Emmanuel was to get an apartment in Boston. Now, not a big goal, but it was a goal. And to do that, I kept my summer job. I was a clerk working for the telephone company out in Springfield, and I was able, my boss said, I can get you a transfer down to Boston. You can get your apartment, and it'll pay the rent until you find a real job. So it's like, well, okay, yeah, I'll do that. But that's just how life happens. I didn't plan to work at the telephone company for 27 years over like about a 30-year spread with time off having a child. But I built a great career out of that and did it, I think, back to that communication skill. Everyone talks about communication and everyone thinks that's talking and writing, but once in a while you have to listen. And I thought that was one of the skills that I brought to the table, is that I actually listened to other people and then could pull things together. I'm now retired from there and moved on to Cape Cod, where I'm running the family pantry of Cape Cod. So I guess I've gone back to my roots as back at the college and looking to do community service, although I'm getting paid, so it's really not community service, but feeding folks on Cape Cod. And I still think it's those same skills. When I interviewed for that job, well, no, I've never run a nonprofit. Well, no, I've never done any grant writing, but I can read and write, and I know if the grant asks the question, you have to answer it. So I think you take your best skills and market them and move on.
Thank you.
When I left Emmanuel, I wanted to be a writer. I think I sort of had envisioned myself as something of a Eugene O'Neill or something along that line. But my career path, there weren't a lot of jobs available. And 1970 was a very difficult job market. There were not a lot of jobs available to begin with, and they certainly weren't looking for Eugene O'Neill's, at least in any of the ads that I could find. I also look back and I can remember still the question being, well, are you going to just raise a family? Are you just going to raise a family, or are you going to actually work? As if that was a choice back then. And I think we were right on the cusp of a generation where that was a choice. There were people who graduated from Emmanuel that did exactly that moved on and raised their families and then spent several years doing that before they thought about going back into the workplace. But the job that I got right out of Emmanuel was as a program director for the Girl Scouts of Rhode Island. And that was a very interesting job because, in part, it was, of course, working with my job was working to train adult professional Girl Scout volunteers. Now, I had absolutely zero experience in teaching at all, and I was about 20, 21 years old, and most of the people that I was supposedly teaching were double my age. They were all parents. They were parents of Girl Scouts, and I was supposed to be teaching them camping skills and Girl Scout songs. So I learned Little Rabbit Foo Foo and a few others, but I think what it taught me was flexibility and a flexible approach to life. And if you're put in a situation, and I think Emmanuel prepared me well for this, if you're put in a situation where you have to adapt, damn it, you're going to adapt. And I did. I also became involved in a couple of political campaigns. I ran Gary Studs' Bedford campaign. That's where I was from. I also worked on the McCarthy campaign. He did very well in Massachusetts, as you may recall. And somewhere in the course of working on these various political campaigns, I became, a lot of the people I worked with were lawyers, and I became inspired by the thought that I would be able to change, as Mary put it, perhaps a greater segment of the population by going to law school. And so I did. I also went to Suffolk Law School, graduated in 1978, and I do land use planning and permitting. And it's an incredible profession in some ways. It's frustrating in a lot of ways. I do a lot of permitting for clean energy, solar and wind. I do permitting for nonprofits, and it is frustrating, the level of opposition you frequently encounter, and communication skills are extremely important in that career path. And then I also have my, not secondary career, but I spend a lot of time on my involvement in Nicaragua, because what my career has taught me, and actually what beginning at Emmanuel, my life has taught me, is that you have to be engaged globally, not just locally. But what I can remember very much being the lesson that I learned here, and probably from Sister Ann Cyril as much as anybody else, is that whatever you do, whatever approach you make in your life, to do it with presence and passion. And if the one lesson I learned was approaching everything in my life with passion.
Thank you.
Well, I went straight to Suffolk. I had a lot of gas left in the tank academically. A lot of people at the time would say, I could never go to law school, I could never go to graduate school, I'm exhausted. I knew that I hadn't done enough. Well, I had to balance work and commuting and everything, but I was very, very, very interested in being in law school. And part of the experience in law school is I was a voluntary defender, where I used to take Vinny's car out to Lynn, and was in the courtroom in the Lynn District Court, driving. You know, it was my first time driving. I never got my license till I was 22 or something. Anyway, I love the courtroom, and I left, when Vin and I graduated law school, a quick typing story. My father is still alive. He's a CPA. He's 92 years old. He's really on the ball, and the only problem he has is his knees bother him. So he said to me, he set me up at an interview, and Vin and I were getting married, I don't know, it was that summer of '74. So it was at an insurance company, and here I am, a graduate of law school, and Vinny Manzi, also a graduate of law school. So my father set me up with this guy, and I go in, and I'm all very, very polite. And I talked to the man for a few minutes and everything, and then he said to me, well, now you can, the lady will be in to give you your typing test. And you all have to read My Beloved Country. Sonia Sotomayor has a great story about this. So I said, I had typed my way through college and law school. I took that class in high school in the summertime in a very hot Cardinal Cushing classroom, boiling hot. I remember that very well. Anyway, the guy said, you're going to take a typing test. And I said, well, gee, I didn't really anticipate taking a typing test, sir. And he said, oh, no, she'll be right in. So I stood up, And I said to him, my friend is graduating from law school with me, Vincent Manzi Jr., and if he were here to be interviewed by you, I think it's unlikely that you'd be asking him to take a typing test, so, because he kept telling me not to go. So I had to finally pull it out and tell him that I wasn't taking a typing test. And they wouldn't ask Vinnie Manzi to take a typing test. So all those letters Vinnie and I get, attorney and Mrs., I hand to him. I'm telling you, I didn't need the word feminist. I don't know where I came from, but I have it in my bones. So then I went on to, I went into practice with Vinnie's father. Oh, so last, I go to my father, I said, Daddy, that man you set me up with, I told him, and I don't know if it's that time he said it to me, or he said it to me many times, my first mentor, Mary, there's only a few stand-up guys in the world, and you're one of them. So I went to work with, Vin and I get married. We both passed the bar, thank God. Half our friends didn't, so we didn't mention it at the wedding. We were married here at Emmanuel. Off I go to Methuen in Lawrence, Massachusetts, join the law firm with Vinnie Manzi's father, my second mentor. He was so wonderful to me. I only knew him for 8 years. Just wonderful. And I worked in the office. It was Manzi and Manzi. He used to say to me after Vinnie and I were married, I married his baby, and it was his daughter that was the doctor that I mentioned earlier. After Vin and I were married, and Vinnie's father was a gentleman, he used to say to me, you know, I always told Vinnie it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich girl as it is to fall in love with a poor girl. But he was only kidding me. I'd say to him, Vin, you know he married me for my money. So anyway, I left the office after I did 2,520 titles for a particular project, and I ended up being the first woman Essex County public defender. I had a lot of firsts, and I really wish I didn't, because that is crazy, but I was. And then I did that for 3 years, and I absolutely loved it. I loved criminal work, but I didn't want to become a better criminal lawyer with higher level criminals. So I went back into the office, and Vin's father was still there at the time. So I hung on in the office for about a year or two, and enjoyed it. And then I ended up, there was an opportunity to become an assistant register in the Essex County Probate and Family Court. My passion, when you talk about passion, is how does the law affect the lives of children? You know, we pay attention certainly to the rights of adults, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, all kinds of couples, blah, blah, blah. But how are children affected, you know? So I went on to be an assistant register, and I went from fourth assistant, and they told me they'll never let a girl be first assistant register. And I said, oh. By then I learned to be quieter about what others' opinions were, because they didn't affect me so much. So I went on to be Judge Albert Petaruto, who was also a mentor, a wonderful guy, a wonderful person. He was from Lawrence, former DA. He was wonderful to me, and some lawyer said to him one day, I was sitting next to him, and he said to him, he says, well, he says, I can see why she got the job. And Judge Petaruto said, she's a fine lawyer, that's why she got the job. And he was like ready to tear the guy's hair out, you know. And I was like, oh, what's this all about? But anyway, I did that for 5 years, and then when Judge Petaruto retired, there were about 100 applications, and I honestly went into it with the idea, I had Vincent by then, he was 2, and I went into it with the idea that maybe I would be selected, probably I wouldn't, the odds were against me, but Governor Michael Dukakis selected me, and I became the 5th judge in the history of the Commonwealth. The last story, I already told it already, but Vincent was 2. My mother, God bless her, she died at the age of 90 in November of 10. Thought I could do anything. I don't know why. But she said to me one time, she said, Judy Rush down the street is so, this is Southie. I'm really tired of all the Southie focus, which I think is just crazy, but that's another panel. My mother said, Mary, Judy Rush said she's so happy that you've become a judge. And these people were all happy I married a lawyer. Wasn't that, I was a lawyer. She's a nice woman, by the way, but she said, my mother said, Judy feels so bad for Vincent because he'll be an only child. And please take this respectfully, sisters. I said, Ma, and we did call our mothers Ma in Southie. She was Ma. Mommy was out of the question. But I said, "Ma, please tell Judy Rush I became a judge, not a nun."
Thank you.
Matthew came 2 years later, thank God. And I had wonderful mentors, and I've gone on too long, but Ruth Abrams of the Supreme Judicial Court, Charlotte Peretta in the Appeals Court, Senator Patricia McGovern when you talk about politics. I worked, in Bobby Kennedy, I worked on his campaign in New York. I was there the weekend before he died. And you know, we were all part of everything, you know. And last story, my mother was a riot. I was meeting Jane Scanlon from Charlestown. We were going to take, neither one of us had any money, and we were going to take laundry, go to a laundry place for the day and make some money, and then go to New York the following weekend. And I was like 18, 19 years old. And my parents were very attentive, but so I had to meet Jane outside the Bunny Club in the Park Square Bunny Club, remember? And Jane, they didn't have a home phone or whatever, and it was the morning that we lost Robert Kennedy, but I was still waiting for her. And she never showed up. Finally, I gave up, and I went back on the bus in tears, you know. So I have an older brother, Tommy, 2 younger brothers. So my brother Tommy's friend told my mother, Mrs. McCauley, I think you should know, I was out at 6:30 in the morning the other day, and I saw Mary in front of the Bunny Club. And my mother gave him some, like, well, naturally you saw her there, or something like she completely covered the action, you know, like she wasn't letting it go. So anyway, I had great parents and great sisters.
Thank you. Anyone else on sort of your career? I have some other questions.
Keep going.
So one of the things you mentioned the feminism, and when you graduated from college, did you see yourselves as feminists? And I know today there's a lot of talk of younger women not sort of embracing that word, and I just would like to get to your perspective on that. When you graduated, did you embrace the word, and why today do you think there's less of an interest in sort of identifying with that?
I'd like to start there. I'm going to start by saying that the media, with all due respect to my colleague, consistently portrayed the women's movement of the 70s as something which was outre, difficult, abnormal, aberrant, and that's not quite right. It was, in fact, a change to the order and the expected behaviors of the previous generations. It is a term that was used in the 70s. Terms were used to describe what was basically a tremendous shift in the expectation of equity and equality. That is, at the very bottom line, what feminism was about then. It is what I believe feminism is about today, although I believe some of the issues of the past are present today, and there are new issues in today's society. The persistent portrayal of feminism negatively, just think about it, bra burners, okay, man-haters. I mean, just go down the list. Those are the words that are typically used to describe the other. Now, everybody knows what the other is. The other is the not quite like us, the change agents, the revolutionaries, and it is a term which is frequently used to marginalize you. Whereas what was happening in the 70s wasn't marginal at all. When you start with Bella Abzug, started 1970, 50 years after, love Bella, right? Yeah. 1970, 50 years, the anniversary of the women's right to vote. Bella Abzug started a strike for pay equity, ladies. 1970, Bella Abzug, okay? 1972, Title IX. Roe v. Wade, 1973, the Equal Pay Act, 1973, Ms. Magazine premiered first issue, 1972, the Equal Rights Amendment, 1976. I can go down the list. All of these activities were considered, in many respects, the fringe movement looking for an agenda. And what was so fascinating at the time is that we actually debated the term. We debated the term feminism. I did panels and broadcast and radio and things like that in the 70s, where people would ask me if I was a feminist, and then there'd be somebody on to say she wasn't a feminist. So you'd be sitting in the same control booth with someone approximately your age who would sit there and say, well, everything you're about is about what I'm not, because, you know, I want a family and I want this and I want that. And I would look at her and say, well, I do too. I would just like to be able to pursue and be who I am with the full equality, full equity in our system, in our society. Today, the word feminism isn't used. I will proudly say I'm a feminist any day of the week, because women still earn 77 cents to the dollar on men. There is still only 3%, I think 4% of CEOs in the U.S. are female. By the way, it's 15% women who are CEOs in other countries. Let's take a look at how many countries now you know who I am, right? Everybody knows who I am. There are other countries, we still not have had a woman president as yet. We will. And, but look around. Look at the women who are, Margaret Thatcher just passed away, not my political favorite, but still, right? Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, we have women all over the world who are leaders. I would call them feminists. I think the word feminism has been maligned. I think we're about people. I think we're about elevating each other, and women were not elevated.
Thank you.
My speech.
Slammed by my fellow panelists.
I didn't say you did it, Louise. I didn't say you did it. You can do it. What do women want? Remember that article?
Anyway, yeah, but I don't think anybody in the mainstream media, by that I mean journalists, ever use the word bra burners, ever. And I can tell you that you know, people like Gloria Steinem, Germaine Greer, Bella Abzug, Barbara Mikulski, they were given a really good birth by people, by journalists to tell their stories. They were able to use the media to convey the values that they promoted. And, you know, as a journalist myself, I can tell you when I got out of Emmanuel, my first job, I was at a radio station in Lawrence, Massachusetts, owned by Kurt Gowdy, who, does anybody here remember Kurt Gowdy? Because when I ask my students now who are like, you know, as old as, you know, like maybe 25 to 30, I say, do any of you know who Kurt Gowdy is? And they look at me like I've just like, spoken a completely alien language. So, but anyway, so he owned the station, and I was writing commercials for $75 a week. And my colleague, who was Kurt Gowdy's personal secretary, one of her jobs was to do the birth announcements, because this is what women were allowed to do at Kurt Gowdy's radio station. And so, like, you know, she'd say, she's really a fabulous woman, Pat Johnson, but her thing was that she was Kurt Gowdy's secretary. And so she would say, here are the birth announcements of Greater Lawrence, you know. And, well, one day she was sick, and they said, can you do it? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I thought, oh, I hope nobody I know is listening to me. So here are the birth announcements, a report of the births at, you know, Lawrence General Hospital in Bon Secours. So anyway, the news director heard me, and he said, hey, you know, you have a good voice. Would you like to do news? I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And so, you know, I started in the news department. And then I come to find out that a guy in the news department, same age, same level of experience, in fact, I had a degree and he did not, was making $20 a week more than me. And so I said to the news director, can you tell me why Greg is making $20 a week more than me? And he said, well, you know, Louise, Greg is married. And I said, so you do realize it's against the law to say that to me? And so then he sort of blanched, and he said, well, we're going to, you know, try to correct it. Yeah, so like a few months went by, and he was paying me like it went from $95 a week to $105. And I said, you know, this is still not good enough. Well, it's the best we can do. So I went to the EEOC office in Boston, and I said, look, I mean, it's a pretty good job. It's great exposure, but, this is not right. So they said, well, we'll take your story. We won't say anything to anybody. We will never identify that it was you. And they were true to their words. So 3 months went by and, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, some guy from the Labor Department knocked on the door of the accountant's office and took up residence there for the next, several, it could be, as many as 12 weeks. And everyone was saying, oh, isn't this terrible? Who could have called the Labor Department? And, of course, they were all sort of looking at me, and I said, isn't that amazing? I cannot possibly imagine who would have done that. So anyway, so also Kirk Gowdy had 7 stations across the country. Well, it turns out he was not paying time and a half overtime as labor law required. So the pay, as I've described, was really bad. So people worked a lot of overtime. So the Labor Department says, what? No time and a half overtime? Are you kidding? So Gowdy was hit with had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of back pay. And, including my stupid $20 a week raise. So everybody got back pay, including the people who thought that wasn't it terrible that someone, how awful. And so Gowdy calls me into his office, and he had, he was a big fisherman, among other things. He had one of those on his walls, and conference table size of a football field, and, fishing gear on the wall. He said, sit down, Louise, old girl. We're going to give you a raise, and not because of this Labor Department thing or anything. It's just because you're doing such a good job. And I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Gowdy. And so, people got checks, I'm telling you, in the thousands of dollars, as did people at all of his other radio stations. And they had the checks, and they said, oh, isn't it terrible? But none of them gave those checks back to Kirk Gowdy. I tell you, they were bemoaning it all the way to the bank. But see, women in my field have these stories. And I think that my field has been good, really, to the women's movement in terms of telling the story.
What I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about sort of young people today and sort of some advice you might be, want to share with them or feelings you have about sort of particularly young women graduating from college and how they might become successful and follow a path that leads them to to a real vocation in their life.
I give advice to friends who have kids who are, finishing college or just out of college, and they either don't have a job or are working something at a much lower level than they'd like to be at. And my advice to them is, and sometimes it's more to the mom or dad than the kid, you got to tell them life's not a race. It doesn't all happen, boom, once you walk out with that degree or diploma or whatever. And you've got to just be patient and kind of find your place. I mean, I didn't intend to work as a clerk at the telephone company. That certainly was not my dream, but it worked into a great career. So just by being there, throwing in some effort and then making your moves there. So that's the advice I give people. It's not a race, and you've got to find your own way.
Thank you.
I ask this for 1 second and say there are 3 things I would say to anyone, male or female, who are in college today. Have courage and experiment. So experiment. You can't know exactly what your path is going to be at 22 years old. Do a lot of things. Experiment with it. Have courage. Take risks. The millennial generation, that age cohort believes, at least 1 in 12 believe that at some point during their lives they will be self-employed. Go out and invent something. Do something great. Reach for it and keep experimenting. There's a lot of life, God willing, in front of you. You can do many, many things in your life. You're well educated, you have intellectual curiosity, and you have confidence, I hope, and youth. Go use it. That is the message. Don't be afraid and keep experimenting.
the point about it sometimes that it takes time. We're in such an instant gratification society. I know I see kids coming out of credit training and they all think that they're going to be like the chief lender the next day. And I keep saying the chief lender took 30 years to be the chief lender, and he's got an incredible amount of information in his head or her head, and you don't get there overnight. So that's one thing. But the other thing too is that, you got to look at yourself and see, what your opportunities are, because no one's going to hand it to you. And I think that when, people ask you to do something that's a little out of the ordinary, because, I worked for a bank that failed, and it was a great environment for learning because as, people bailed out, all of a sudden, like somebody once said to me that in the bank that I worked for that failed, I was managing a larger loan portfolio than I did when I moved to, a successful bank. So there were a lot of opportunities that you get a lot of skills, and look at the skills you have and see how they translate to other things, because you can do a lot of stuff with what you know, but it may not be in your immediate area. Sometimes you have to go left to get up. So,
thank you.
I have a thing about not letting anyone else define you. And that, because I think there's so much of that. I saw that within the judiciary. I was shocked by it. A judge trying to be like another judge, and you certainly can learn from others. But I suppose it's the Irish in me and all. But I was always myself, and I always, with help from others, believed in myself and tried to become the best I could be in anything. And it sounds really, it's not real high-level academics, but I was in a gift store in Newburyport a couple weeks ago, and there was a card or a pillow that said, for success in life, you need 3 bones: a wishbone, a funny bone, and a backbone.
Thank you.
I feel that. So briefly, I always tell my students, I think that, first of all, you have to follow your passion and follow your strengths. It's very important to, I always say you have to follow the news. You have to know what's going on in the world around you. You cannot just be, doing what you're trying to do and not know what the trends are. And I teach business students, and it's crazy that I really know a lot about business now. But you have to know what the trends are. You have to know what the markets are. You have to be very good in your communications. I know people who, when they get a resume that has a spelling mistake or grammatical mistake, it's immediately tossed out because there's so many people who are applying for it. So it's very important to be very good with your communications, both spoken and written. And I also say, and I know it sounds trite, don't do drugs. I mean, I think a lot of people in this society, I actually have one of my students, well, I'm not going to say that, but I'll tell you later. But anyway, but look, half of our society is smoking pot, and I just think it is the great drive killer. And I really think that people, and I always say everybody's out there on drugs, whether they're prescribed or buying on the streets. And I always say, like, I'm out here hanging by my fingernails in reality land. But I think we all have to sort of, really be connected and know what's out there and be alert and express ourselves properly, and don't give up. Don't give up. It's tough. It's really hard. It was tough for me. It's tough in this environment. 21st century is beginning of 21st century, bad time to be in business, but you can do it. They can do it. And that's what I tell them.
Thank you.
Well, I start with my be flexible advice, because I was actually driving on the Southeast Expressway the other day, and I saw a big billboard sign that said 1 out of every 3 babies born today will live to be 100. And that flabbergasted me. I mean, you know, when was our life expectation ever anything close to that? But I think one of the things that has happened to many of us, certainly to me and to others, is that you will experience several different careers during your lifetime, and if your first job isn't, you know, where you ultimately want to be, again, make the best of it, approach it with passion, and, you know, you'll eventually get, hopefully, to a place where you're comfortable and you're confident that you're making the contribution that you want to make. The other piece of advice is be wary of social media. I cannot tell you, I interview a lot of people, and I remember interviewing a potential associate in our law firm a few years ago, and you know, he had all kinds of Facebook posts with him in quite compromising positions, and his claim to fame on his Facebook post was that he was the beer pong champion of his undergraduate school. You probably don't want to be posting those kinds of things, and I think, you know, I think you have to be very wary, and it's certainly, I never grew up with that kind of social media, and most of the people in this room didn't. But I think that's you have to be very careful. And lastly, I think I would just say, take your commitments very seriously, but take yourself less seriously. I think you've got to sort of give yourself a break and step back and sort of see the humor in the way things happen sometimes, because, you know, there may or may not be some great purpose to all of our lives, but I think you have to step back and just approach it with a little bit of sense of humor.
I know Sister Janet has a question. Comment, okay. Great. Yeah, you're welcome.
First of all, I couldn't agree more with what I've heard, and my first response is, wow. And the second one is, college opened before women had a constitutional right to vote, and you are the living proof that that was the right thing to do then. I also remember very well your days, because I also was here with you. I remember those were the days when we did have Betty Friedan speaking on campus, when we did have Dorothy Day, when the beginning of Our Bodies, Ourselves, the Women's Health book, was written, came together on this campus. And in the middle of it, some of the stories are told, and we heard coming over, we used to have loud speakers, Sister Dolores, please come to the 5th floor, or some expression such as that. So it was very much a part of us. When I think of the commitment to service, and that I hear here, whether it's specifically from Nicaragua, or the many alums who are gathered at the Cape around that pantry project, that is just exactly what we're trying with our current students. Have them engage, and it's not hard because the students just do that. I listened to you talk about what I think we call self-determination of the residence halls. That was the word. I knew it well.
That's great.
And some of you don't remember that 55 young men from Boston College did a sit-in in Loretto Hall, which facilitated the self-determination of the residence halls. I remember that well as well.
That's great.
But I think, most of all, when I think of the impact, I think of how alive it is now. And when we talk about shaping the life of the college, when I welcome each incoming class, the next one will be the class of 2017, one of the things in every one of my opening remarks is, Emmanuel College will never be the same now that you are here. And I say it both seriously, and they sometimes hear it seriously, and they also hear it facetiously, but the older classes hear it, the older classes meaning like the juniors and seniors in college, hear it as, that's true, and we do make a difference, and the students out on the quad today are continuing the shaping, right, Bill?
There.
that you talked about. One of the comments, several of the comments were that you went to single-sex secondary schools and a single-sex college. And I would say to you that I wish there were more single-sex high schools, but now that we're co-ed, we now attract young women from the academies from which they would not come, having had enough single-sex education, they told us in the late 90s, while they were in secondary and elementary school, particularly secondary. But I guess what I would say is that we now educate more women than we ever have in the past because of the size of our classes. And you will not be surprised that the president of student government this year, last year, and the year before, and the presidents of classes, not the vice presidents, secretaries, are women. Every other year, and this is also important because we believe that the education that we had here for young women is also excellent for young men. And while there are fewer young men, they nevertheless also have a good understanding of what it means to work with women who are in leadership roles. And they're working with them while they are 18, 19, and 20. So I just share that with you, but most of all, a great thank you for the people you are and for your great commitment to come today and to share with us and to keep on coming at least once a year, Rosemary says, if not more, in April. So thank you very much.
Thank you.